Hi, welcome back. This will be part 4 of the UV mapping tutorial series, of a character UV mapping series. Last video we unfolded the feet and the legs. We've already got the torso unfolded. So this video we'll talk about how to unfold the arms. And we'll probably even talk about a little bit of correction of the UVs. And then we'll come back in the next video and talk about how to do the head and finalizing the UVs. So for the arms, what we're going to do is follow the same seam line as what we did for the sleeve. So we're going to come in here in edge mode. Let me select an edge and get so we can see the angle here. I'm going to turn Object X Symmetry back on. I'm going to select this edge on the underside of the arm and follow down the length of the arm to the wrist. So the wrist is an area where we could have some problems with how it's unfolding unless we create proper seams. So one thing that we can do, and I'll show you both methods here, is let's go ahead and cut the seam actually from the center of the arm. Let's do cut. But I stopped at the wrist. So one thing we can do is select that loop around the wrist, the center loop around the wrist, and cut that. So basically the skin on the arm will unfold like its own UV shell, and then we will treat the hand and fingers as separate UV shells as well. So we'll come back and I'll show you an alternate to that here in a little bit. I'm going to select this edge and I'm going to hold down Shift and double click, and I'm going to go down the horizontal length of the fingers. I'm going to skip over to this finger. So I have an edge loop down the center line of the fingers, and this will allow me to unfold my hand as if there was a glove on there with a piece of cloth on the top and a piece of cloth on the bottom. So basically this line loop is going to go all the way throughout the center line of the fingers. Let's do cut. And that's all the seams I really need for the fingers. I could cut off each finger, but then I would have actually more seams. So if I'm trying to do a fluent skin texture, we want to have as little amount of seams as possible. And this really will produce the best approach for the UVs for the fingers. So basically it's the seam from the wrist on one side down the horizontal length of the fingers in the middle all the way to the other side. Let's make sure the other side of the body did this. So it did with my symmetry on. Alright, so within UV shell we can select the skin on the arms and do unfold. That looks pretty good if you can kind of see that. No overlapping UVs. We'll move that down. Maybe this bottom quadrant right there. I'm going to select the top hand UV shell and do unfold. So there are those two. And I'm going to select the bottom hand UV shells and do unfold. Okay, we'll move them down here as well. Turn off symmetry for a second and move these over close to one another, and we'll go in and talk about these a little more. Alright. So if I take a look at my checker pattern, that's doing a pretty good job. It might have some diagonal lines, but overall, if I take a look at the rotate of some of these, let's just make them kind of more vertical. There you go. It's a pretty even checker pattern. If I look at the hands, it's doing a pretty good job on the hands as well. So this is an easy way to set up cut seams for the arms. Now, one thing I did want to notice is that this, well, two things. There will be a seam around the wrist, so that could cause some issues with the texture not flowing over that area naturally. So we do want to try to reduce that. We'll correct that or show a different method of that here in a minute. And the other thing, which we'll come back to in a later video and try to correct, is the fingers don't really look like the actual proportions. They're splayed or rotated out from one another more. It will work properly this way, but we could also improve this a little bit by just making the fingers positioned more like what they look like in the viewport, like our human hand is positioned in the 3D view. So those are some other things that we can think about. Basically, I would just start by rotating these so that way I can tell which hand is which. Put that there. And put this one there. There we go. Alright, so I know this is the right hand, and this is the right arm, and then this is the left hand and left arm. Okay. So for right now, that is probably going to be good enough. We'll come back and do some other corrections later. One other thing I want to show you is just another way that we can connect it up so we have a little bit less seams. And this method, we're still going to need a seam on the wrist, but it's going to be a half loop instead of a full loop. So I'm going to take the top edge seam, not the whole loop, but from the point where the top and bottom of the hand meet the wrist, and I'm going to sew that back together. So basically, actually, let's go back and let's turn on symmetry. So Object X symmetry. And we'll come back and reselect those. Okay. So I'm going to keep the bottom seam, but the top seam, I'm going to sew that back together. So basically, we still have the horizontal line down the length of the hand, but we have the bottom seam and then the seam down the length of the arm. Now it's going to make our UVs look a little weird. But one thing we can do is also connect the top of the hand to the bottom of the hand. So we can take the seam on the outside of the pinky and take that edge down the length of the finger, still with the one on the fingertip, but take that one down the length and sew that back together as well. So basically we're going to have one UV shell for the arm instead of 3. Before, you can see where they're positioned, I had 1, 2, 3 different UV shells. We need to re-unfold, but this will create less seams. So let's go back to UV shell mode and do unfold. And let's go to UV shells, turn off symmetry mode for a second. All right, and now I have one seam instead of, or one UV shell instead of multiple UV shells. Now this will work, but it will kind of crunch up some areas, and we'll still have to have seams in areas. So it's going to crunch up a little bit here. It's going to crunch up a little bit on that back seam on the back of the finger. But the advantage is that we're going to have less seams around the wrist and on the back of the finger as well. So it's another good opportunity. It does make it look a little weird and less like a hand, but hopefully you can still determine these are the fingers, of course, and this is the forearm. So just a different way to kind of approach the hand. You can cut the seam off for the wrist completely, or we can do a half seam for the wrist and still the length down the fingers to have one UV shell for the arm section. So it's just a choice and a preference. So I figured I'd show you both methods here. All right, so we put the seam down the bottom line of, or bottom part of the arm, and then on the underside of the wrist, and then down the horizontal length of the fingers. So that's where the seams are, and they unfolded pretty well. Next video, we'll come back and talk about how to unfold the head, and then we'll get back in, discuss how to refine some of these UV shells so that they don't have as much distortion to them.